Imagine a weapon that cannot be seen, touched, or confiscated. It is not made of steel, nor is it a product of digital warfare. It leaves no physical scars, yet it has the power to dismantle empires, shatter egos, and obliterate the psychological defenses of any opponent. It is a state of mind so terrifyingly efficient that it renders the user immune to fear, manipulation, and the chaotic turbulence of the human condition. We are talking about the psychological anomaly known as Taoist detachment. To the uninitiated, this ancient philosophy is often misidentified as pacifism, a passive surrender to the flow of life, or a mystic's retreat into the mountains. This is a catastrophic misinterpretation. When stripped of its religious ornamentation and analyzed through the cold lens of behavioral psychology and strategic warfare, Taoist detachment reveals itself as the ultimate defensive and offensive mechanism. It is the psychology of the void. It is the ability to care so little about the outcome that you become the master of the process. In a world driven by desperate attachment to status, to money, to relationships, to survival itself, the man who is attached to nothing is the most dangerous person in the room. He cannot be bribed because he needs nothing. He cannot be threatened because he fears no loss. He cannot be shamed because he seeks no validation. This is the deep dive into the abyss of the Tao. We are going to open the vault on the mechanism of Wu Wei, dissect the neuroscience of the uncarved block, and explore why total psychological detachment is the nuclear option in the arsenal of human interaction. To understand the lethality of this psychological state, we must first exhume its origins. We often picture the Taoists as serene sages sitting by waterfalls, but the philosophy was born in blood. The foundational texts of Taoism, the Tao Te Ching and the Zhuangzi, emerged during the Warring States period of ancient China. This was not a time of peace. It was centuries of unrelenting horror, where kingdoms were pulverized, populations were decimated, and the average lifespan was cut short by the sword or starvation. The air smelled of iron and rot. It was a crucible of trauma. In this environment, the human mind had two choices: shatter under the weight of suffering, or evolve a psychological armor so impenetrable that the suffering could not touch it. Detachment was that armor. It was not a lifestyle choice. It was a survival strategy. The early Taoist masters realized that the source of human anguish was not the war outside, but the resistance inside. Pain is physical, suffering is psychological. Suffering is created by the gap between what you want the world to be and what the world actually is. By closing that gap, by accepting the chaos not with resignation, but with a fluid, lethal adaptability, they became empty. And in strategy, emptiness is power. Consider the metaphor of the empty boat, articulated by the sage Zhuangzi. Imagine you are crossing a river in a small boat. Suddenly, another boat crashes into yours. If there is a person in that other boat, you will likely shout, scream, and curse at them for their incompetence. Your blood pressure rises, cortisol floods your system, and your judgment becomes clouded by anger. You are engaged in a conflict. Now, imagine the exact same collision occurs. The wood splinters, the jolt throws you off balance. But as you look up to scream, you see that the other boat is empty. It is simply drifted downstream and collided with you. In that instant, your anger vanishes. There is no one to blame. There is no ego to fight. You simply push the boat away and continue. The event is the same, but your psychological reaction is polar opposites. The Taoist master strives to become the empty boat. When an opponent attacks them, they find no ego to hit. When a manipulator tries to hook them, there is nothing to grab. They move through the world with the physics of a phantom. If you enter a negotiation, a fight, or a relationship as an empty boat, you possess a terrifying advantage. You are acting without the friction of the self. This brings us to the clinical dissection of the self in this context. Modern psychology tells us that the ego or the self is a construct, a narrative we tell ourselves about who we are, what we deserve, and what we are afraid of losing. This narrative is maintained by the default mode network in the brain, a series of interacting brain regions that are active when we are thinking about ourselves, worrying about the future, or regretting the past. It is the neurological seat of neuroticism. Taoist detachment is effectively the deliberate suppression of the default mode network. It is a state of hypoegoic functioning. When a sniper takes a shot, he does not think about his childhood, his mortgage, or his fear of failure. He enters a state of flow. He becomes the process of the shot. Taoist detachment is application of that sniper-like flow to every single second of existence. It is a continuous state of high-performance dissociation. But why is this dangerous? Why do we use such aggressive terminology for a philosophy of flow? Because society functions on the leverage of attachment. Your boss controls you because you are attached to your salary and your title. Your partner manipulates you because you are attached to their affection or the fear of loneliness. The government ensures compliance through the attachment to safety and liberty. All social control mechanisms rely on the subject having something to lose. The practitioner of Taoist detachment, the individual who has truly internalized the concept of the void, cuts these strings. When you encounter someone who is willing to walk away from anything, a $1 million deal, a 10-year marriage, their own reputation, even their life, you are encountering a force of nature. You have no leverage. This creates a power vacuum. In any human interaction, the person who cares the least holds the most power. This is the iron law of detachment. By caring zero, the Taoist holds 100% of the cards. Let us look deeper into the mechanism of Wu Wei, often translated as non-action. This is a disastrous mistranslation that dulls the blade of the concept. Wu Wei is not sitting on the couch doing nothing. Wu Wei is action without intent. It is effortless action. It is the concept of acting in perfect accordance with the situation, rather than forcing your will upon it. Think of a butcher. In the Zhuangzi, there is a famous story of Cook Ding. He is carving an ox for the king. His knife moves with a rhythm like a dance. After years of work, his blade is as sharp as if it were fresh from the grindstone. The king asks how this is possible. Ding explains that an ordinary butcher hacks at the bone and dulls his blade in a month. A good butcher cuts through the meat and dulls his blade in a year. But Ding does not cut. He finds the empty spaces between the joints. He inserts the blade into the void where there is no resistance. Because the knife enters the emptiness, it never dulls. This is the most sophisticated metaphor for psychological warfare ever written. The meat and bone are the conflicts and resistances of the world. The ordinary person hacks at life. They argue, they force, they struggle, they burn out. Their psychological blade becomes dull and jagged. They develop trauma, exhaustion, and bitterness. The Taoist operator finds the spaces between. They navigate office politics, hostile interrogations, and crisis situations by finding the path of least resistance. They do not clash with the opponent's strength. They flow into the opponent's weakness. This makes them sustainable. While you are exhausting yourself trying to destroy them, they are simply waiting for you to collapse, preserving their energy, their blade remaining razor sharp. This level of detachment requires a radical restructuring of perception. It requires the adoption of the mirror mind. The sage uses his mind like a mirror. A mirror reflects everything that stands before it perfectly. It does not judge the image. It does not try to hold on to the image when it leaves. It does not refuse the next image that comes. It receives, reflects, and lets go. In a clinical setting, we might compare this to the demeanor of a high-functioning psychopath, or perhaps a seasoned trauma surgeon. There is a coldness to it. If you are pleading with a mirror, the mirror does not pity you. It just shows you your own desperation. This is why the detached individual is so unsettling. We crave validation. We want the other person to react to our emotions. When we scream, we want them to flinch. When we cry, we want them to comfort. When the Taoist meets your fire with water, or worse, with air, it forces you to confront the absurdity of your own behavior. It reflects your chaos back at you, amplifying your own instability while they remain unmoved. Let's descend further into the darker applications of this. In the realm of negotiation and corporate strategy, this detachment is weaponized as the walkaway. Most people negotiate with a desperate need to close the deal. They have already mentally spent the money. They have already attached their ego to the victory. Because of this, they have a tell. They have a breaking point where they will compromise to save the deal. The Taoist negotiator views the deal as a transience. If it happens, it is the Tao. If it does not, it is the Tao. They are indifferent. This indifference is not a bluff. You cannot fake the micro-expressions of true detachment. When the opponent realizes that you genuinely do not care if the deal burns to the ground, panic sets in. They begin to bid against themselves. They offer concessions just to keep you at the table, because your presence is so ghostly, so ready to vanish, that they feel the need to tether you with value. You attract by retreating. You gain by letting go. Historically, this aligns with the darker readings of Sun Tzu's Art of War, which is deeply rooted in Taoist metaphysics. Sun Tzu advises to be formless. To be formless is to be detached from any specific plan, any specific identity, or any specific formation. If you have a shape, you can be countered. If you are rigid, you can be broken. The Taoist is water. Water has no shape, yet it carves through stone. It seeks the low places, infiltrates the cracks, and when trapped, it rises until it overflows. In a conflict scenario, how do you fight someone who absorbs your strikes like water? If you punch water, your fist goes through, and the water immediately seals around your arm, trapping you. The more you struggle, the more you drown. The detached psychological state allows the individual to absorb insults, accusations, and attacks without the reflex of defense. Most of us defend ourselves immediately when attacked. I didn't do that, you're wrong, how dare you? This defense gives the attacker information. It tells them what hurts you. It tells them what you value. By refusing to defend, by absorbing the attack into the void of silence or indifferent agreement, the Taoist gives the attacker nothing. This is known as the gray rock method in modern psychology dealing with narcissists, but the Taoists perfected it millennia ago. You become a gray rock, boring, unresponsive, impenetrable. The attacker exhausts their supply of aggression against an object that refuses to be a victim. But we must also look at the internal cost and the terrifying existential implications of this philosophy. To achieve this state of the most dangerous weapon, one must effectively kill a part of their humanity. The uncarved block, or pu, is the state of pure potential before the conditioning of society carves us into shapes. But to return to the uncarved block is to strip away the things that make us human in the sentimental sense. Can a truly detached person love? This is the controversy. If you are detached from the outcome, can you truly care for a child, a lover, or a friend? The Taoist argues that attachment is not love. Attachment is possession. They would say that only when you stop needing someone can you truly see them. But from the outside, this looks like coldness. It looks like a high-functioning void. There is a fine line between Taoist detachment and dissociation caused by trauma or psychopathy. The external behaviors can look identical. The psychopath feels no empathy because of a neurological deficit. The traumatized person feels nothing because their system has shut down to survive. The Taoist, however, feels everything but holds on to nothing. It is not an absence of emotion, it is a non-stick coating against emotion. The emotion arises, is experienced fully, and instantly evaporates. This allows for extreme clarity in high-stakes environments. Let's analyze the cooling of the blood. In traditional Chinese medicine and Taoist alchemy, excessive emotion is seen as heat. Anger is fire in the liver. Anxiety is heat in the heart. This heat cooks the internal organs and clouds the mind. Detachment is a cooling process. It lowers the metabolic cost of living. Think of the modern executive or politician. They are often burning up, red-faced, hypertensive, sleepless, fueled by stimulants and ambition. They are powerful, yes, but they are brittle. They are one scandal, one market crash away from a stroke or a breakdown. Now picture the shadow advisor, the calm figure in the background who speaks in a low voice, who never seems rushed, who outlasts every administration. That is the Taoist application. They preserve their jing, their vital essence, by not leaking energy into useless emotional outbursts. This conservation of energy allows for bursts of extreme decisive violence or action when necessary. Because they are not leaking energy 24/7 in a state of chronic stress, they have a reservoir of power that the neurotic person does not. When the uncarved block decides to strike, it strikes with the full weight of reality. There is no hesitation. Hesitation comes from weighing options, from fear of making a mistake. If you are detached from the outcome, there is no mistake. There is only the action. This eliminates the reaction time latency caused by moral or egoic dilemma. Let's take a case study of this in a hypothetical crisis management scenario. A corporation is facing a massive data breach. The CEO is panicking, screaming at IT, worrying about the stock price, drafting apologies. He is attached to his reputation. His mind is frantic, jumping from the future lawsuits to the past who made the mistake. He is useless. The crisis manager enters. She practices this detachment. She does not care if the company goes bankrupt. She does not care if the CEO is fired. She has no emotional stake. Because of this, she can see the chessboard with perfect clarity.
Ineptity. She sees the moves that the panicked CEO misses. She speaks calmly. She directs resources efficiently. She creates a narrative not out of fear, but out of strategy. Her lack of care for the company's survival is exactly what saves the company. This is the paradox. To save a thing, you must be willing to let it die. This paradox is central to the weaponization of the philosophy. In relationships, we see this dynamics play out brutally. The concept of the person who is willing to walk away has the power is the cornerstone of modern dating strategy, often cited in dark triad communities, but usually it is faked. People pretend to be aloof. True Taoist detachment in romance is terrifying because it is not a game. The practitioner genuinely finds their wholeness within themselves. They do not need the other person to complete them. They are a self-sustaining ecosystem. If the partner stays, good. If the partner leaves, the ecosystem remains intact. This makes the practitioner incredibly attractive and incredibly frustrating. They cannot be manipulated by guilt trips, silent treatments, or jealousy plots. Those are weapons that target attachment. You cannot target what isn't there. However, this deep dive must also address the dark side of the Tao. If you detach from social norms and moral outcomes, you enter a space of moral relativism. The Tao Te Ching famously says, "Heaven and earth are not humane. They regard all things as straw dogs." Straw dogs were ceremonial objects used in rituals and then discarded and trampled. If a human adopts the perspective of heaven and earth, they become inhumane. Not cruel, but indifferent. They view the suffering of others as part of the natural flow, the same way a tiger views a dying gazelle. It is just the way of things. A leader with this mindset can make decisions that sacrifice thousands of people without losing a wink of sleep, not because they enjoy the killing, but because they view it as a necessary pruning of the tree. This is the psychology of the philosopher king, or the benevolent dictator, who operates beyond good and evil. It is a God complex stripped of the ego. It is functional divinity, and it is dangerous because it removes the check and balance of human guilt. Let's explore the cognitive reframing techniques that allow a person to achieve this state. How does one actually build this weapon? It starts with the linguistic dismantling of good and bad. The Taoist story of the old man and the horse illustrates this. The man's horse runs away. Neighbors say, "That's bad." The man says, "Who knows?" The horse returns with wild horses. Neighbors say, "That's good." The man says, "Who knows?" His son rides a wild horse, falls, breaks his leg. Neighbors say, "Bad." Man says, "Who knows?" The army comes to draft soldiers, rejects the son because of the broken leg. The son lives. This is not just a fable, it is a cognitive algorithm. The detached mind refuses to label an event as a tragedy or a victory until the timeline is finished, and the timeline is never finished. By refusing to label an event bad, the amygdala does not fire the stress response. If you don't label the insult disrespect, you don't feel anger. If you don't label the job loss failure, you don't feel depression. You hack your own emotional software by rewriting the input code. This makes the user highly resilient to torture, interrogation, and prolonged hardship. In prisoner of war camps, the men who survived were often those who could detach from their previous lives and accept the reality of the camp without giving up the will to live. They entered a state of hibernation of the soul. They focused on the immediate, the bowl of rice, the lice, the sweeping. They did not burn energy hoping for rescue tomorrow. They lived in the eternal, brutal now. This is dark Taoism in its purest survivalist form. We must also look at the aesthetics of silence. The detached individual uses silence as a weapon. In a world of noise, silence is a vacuum. People are terrified of silence. They rush to fill it with chatter, and in doing so, they reveal their secrets, their insecurities, and their plans. The Taoist sits in the silence comfortably. They let the silence stretch until it becomes heavy, until it crushes the opponent. During the Cold War, interrogators would sometimes use the silent treatment, not as a punishment, but as an elicitation technique. They would sit across from the subject and say nothing. The subject, desperate for connection, desperate to break the tension, would start talking. They would confess things they weren't even asked about. The Taoist practitioner carries this portable silence with them. They are a walking void that induces others to spill their truths. Now, let's look at the fluidity of identity, the ultimate camouflage. If you are attached to being a tough guy, you can be baited into a fight you can't win. If you are attached to being a smart
Intellectual, you can be baited into an argument where you look arrogant. If you are attached to being a good person, you can be manipulated by someone playing the victim. The detached operator has no fixed identity. They are water. They can play the fool, the king, the servant, or the warrior, depending on what the situation demands. They have no ego to protect, so they don't mind looking stupid if looking stupid gets them what they want. This is the strategy of the pig that eats the tiger. In Chinese strategy, playing the pig means appearing harmless, gluttonous, and dim-witted to lower the defenses of the predator. Then, when the tiger is asleep, the pig strikes. Only a man with zero attachment to his pride can play the pig effectively. This brings us to the concept of uselessness. Zhuangzi speaks of a tree that is so gnarled and twisted that no carpenter wants to cut it down. Because it is useless for furniture, it lives for 1,000 years. The straight, beautiful trees are cut down young. In a dangerous authoritarian regime or a cutthroat corporate culture, being useful can be a death sentence. It makes you a tool for others. It makes you a target. The Taoist weaponizes uselessness. By appearing to have no ambition, by appearing to be of no threat, they become invisible to the predators who are looking for rivals. They survive the purges. They survive the layoffs. They are left alone to grow their roots deep. This is strategic incompetence or tactical mediocrity. It is a cloak of invisibility woven from the lack of attachment to status. While the ambitious fight for the crown and lose their heads, the useless Taoist sits in the shade and watches the empire fall. But what happens to the mind that stays in this state for too long? We must examine the abyss of nihilism. Taoism is distinct from nihilism, but they are neighbors. Nihilism says nothing matters, so give up. Taoism says nothing matters, so play. But if the playful aspect is lost, the practitioner risks falling into a catatonic state of indifference. The weapon can turn on its user. It can sever the connections to reality so thoroughly that the person becomes a ghost in their own life. They might achieve invulnerability, but at the cost of vitality. However, for the high-level operator, this is a calculated risk. They microdose detachment. They use it as a tool, not a lifestyle. They engage the attachment when they are with their family, and they sever it the moment they step into the war room. This ability to toggle empathy and ego on and off is the hallmark of the most elite psychological performers: spies, special forces, crisis negotiators, and top-tier CEOs. Let's go deeper into the neuroscience of the flow state versus the detached state. Flow usually implies high engagement. Detachment implies low engagement. But Taoist Wu Wei is the paradoxical high engagement detachment. You are fully engaged with the task, but fully detached from the result of the task. MRI scans of monks and long-term meditators show a thickening of the prefrontal cortex and a shrinking of the amygdala. This physical restructuring of the brain hardware means that the startle response is physically dampened. You could fire a gun behind a master's head, and their heart rate might not even jump. This is not just discipline, it is physiological modification. In a physical altercation, this is devastating. The untrained fighter is flooded with adrenaline. They get tunnel vision, they lose fine motor skills, they swing wildly. The detached fighter retains their peripheral vision. They retain their fine motor skills. Their heart rate remains low. They can see the telegraphing of the opponent's moves because their brain is not screaming danger. They are operating in slow motion while the opponent is operating in fast-forward panic. The empty mind, mushin in Japanese martial arts, derived from Taoism, is the state where the body moves without the conscious mind interfering. It is the ultimate reaction speed because the middle manager of the brain has been fired. This extends to verbal conflict. We have all seen the person who stays creepily calm while being screamed at. It is unnerving. It signals a hierarchy. The one who loses control is the subordinate. The one who maintains control is the superior. By mastering detachment, you automatically place yourself at the top of the dominance hierarchy in any room. You become the parent, and everyone else becomes the toddler. But how is this a weapon against society itself? Society relies on consumerism. Consumerism relies on the hungry ghost mentality, the feeling of emptiness that must be filled with things. The Taoist realizes the emptiness is the point. The emptiness is the functional part of the bowl. You cannot sell anything to a person who is content with nothing. You cannot propagate propaganda to a person who views all human narratives as temporary and relative. The detached individual is a glitch in the matrix. They are economically and politically ungovernable. If this psychology were to spread in mass, the economy would collapse. Wars would become impossible to staff because no one would be attached to the concept of nation or glory. Thus, detachment is not just a personal weapon, it is a revolutionary threat. It is the ultimate rebellion, the rebellion of doing nothing, wanting nothing, and being nothing. Let's return to the specific technique of the view from above. This is a visualization where one zooms out from their body to the room, to the city, to the planet, to the galaxy. From the perspective of a galaxy, a divorce, a bankruptcy, or a war is smaller than a microbe. This is not to belittle suffering, but to contextualize it. It is a psychological zoom lens. When a detached operator is facing a crisis, they zoom out. They see themselves as a speck of dust on a rock spinning in a void. This dissolves the paralyzing weight of the importance of the event. If it doesn't matter on a cosmic scale, then there is no need to be afraid. And if there is no fear, one can act with total, reckless precision. It unlocks a bravery that looks like madness to the attached observer. Consider the mad monks of history, like Qigong. He ate meat, drank wine, and dressed in rags, mocking the rigid rules of the monastery. He was detached even from the rules of detachment. He was unpredictable. In a strategic sense, unpredictability is lethality. If your enemy cannot profile you because you have no fixed habits, no fixed morals, and no fixed desires, they cannot predict your next move. You become a random number generator in their algorithm. The soft overcoming the hard. This is the core physics of Taoism. A tongue is soft, teeth are hard. With age, the teeth fall out, but the tongue remains. The hurricane snaps the rigid oak tree, but the grass bends and survives. In the modern world, hardness is the aggressive, type A, dominant personality. They often win in the short term, but they burn bridges and create enemies. The soft strategist builds networks. They yield to win. They let the other person have the victory of the argument while they quietly secure the assets. They apologize when they are not wrong, simply to end the conflict and save time. They absorb the blow to the ego because they have no ego to bruise. This long-game survivability makes them the ultimate winners in the evolutionary contest. We must also discuss the void of information. In the age of social media, everyone is broadcasting their identity. Look at me, look at what I care about. This is offering up your vulnerabilities to the world. You are showing your throat. You are telling the world exactly how to hurt you, how to please you, and how to sell to you. The detached individual is a black hole of data. They consume but do not broadcast. They are the lurkers, the watchers. In a conflict, information is ammunition. By being opaque, by being an empty boat, they deny the enemy any ammunition. You cannot cancel someone who has no public stance. You cannot shame someone who has no public pride. You cannot frame someone who leaves no digital footprint of their soul. As we near the end of this dissection, we must confront the finality of death. Attachment to life is the root of all cowardice. The Taoist is Wangji sang at his wife's funeral and viewed his own death as a transformation, like the changing of the seasons. How do I know that loving life is not a delusion? How do I know that in hating death I am not like a man who went away from home when young and does not know how to get back? This removal of the fear of death is the ultimate superpower. A soldier who does not fear death cannot be routed. A leader who does not fear assassination cannot be coerced. It is the berserker state, refined into a philosophy. It is not that they want to die, but they accept it as a necessary corollary to living. This acceptance frees up the mental bandwidth that most people use to suppress the terror of mortality. They use that bandwidth for observation, for strategy, for living with a terrifying intensity. So, is Taoist detachment a weapon? Yes, it is a scalpel that excises the weakness from the human psyche. It removes the handles that the world uses to grab you. It transforms the user from a pawn, pushed around by emotions, societal expectations, and biological drives, into a player. But it is a weapon that comes with a heavy price. To hold it, you must be willing to let go of the warm, messy, chaotic comfort of shared human commiseration. You must be willing to stand alone in the cold wind of the void, watching the drama of the world unfold without needing to step onto the stage. You become the empty boat. You drift through the collisions of life without damage. You are invulnerable. You are free. But in that freedom, there is a profound silence. And it is in that silence that the true master resides, dangerous, untouchable, and utterly, terrifyingly whole. The vault is closed. The question is, are you brave enough to open your own mind and let the emptiness in? Or will you cling to the sinking ship of your attachments until the very end? The choice, as always, is yours. But remember, the river flows, whether you swim or drown.